Yeah, so last night, for a moment or a few moments, you got onto the piano, and I was observing what you were playing, and I was saying, or I was asking you how the musicians that you play with, how they would, what were we saying? Yeah, how they would interact with what you were doing, because it was a lot of stuff to follow at once. The harmony was moving quickly, or moving the bass notes, and just playing what you felt. So I was wondering if you can share some insight into maybe how to approach playing with a free player like yourself.
Well, if it's really free playing, it's not really having too much to do with thinking and logic, see, and that conceptualization seems to prohibit what may in fact be happening as called as free music. And so what I would say is it's good for the players to hear what I'm playing and maybe attempt to relate to it, but not because they can define it and think about it and thus concretely, what you might say, compose it in their minds as something that is not what it is. See, it's not concrete. In the moment of that flow, it's free. It's not anything. It's just like breathing. It's coming through. And if we want to get to the inner or higher realms of creative music or creative thinking, we have to understand the barrier of concrete thought, thinking about it, making it limited to or defined by thought, when it may have nothing to do with thought, and it may have more to do with the spirit of the moment.
And then so we were discussing certainly the musicians who need to train in order to get to that place. So you have to learn your forms. You have to learn how the whatever it is, whatever instrument you're working with, how the harmony is moving, or what the melodic content is. All of that stuff. So that would be like a first step, would you say, in order to get to what you're talking about?
Well, it could be a first step. The way that I play is the way I played as a child. That's like a primordial first step. That is to play without thought. Just play to play. In the early life experience that I had, it was all about drumming. And drums are about patterns of drumming. If it's going to be, I guess you might say, useful or worth listening to, then it's the pattern of thought. Instead of just thump, 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 thump. That would be boring and useless beyond the point. So there has to be more going on that is part of the creative potential of the individual as a drummer or as a musician. See? And there must be room for what is not thought of, and that could be more directly felt as something that belongs in what it is that you're doing, or what it is that I'm doing, of itself. See? So in the creative work that I've done with some of the great musicians, there was no thinking going on. It was just relating to what we were hearing without thinking about it, just having a sense of what we believe and intuitively sort of relate to based upon what it appears to be by hearing it. See? Whether that's a tempo, or whether that's a harmony, or whether we, in our minds, formulate it as a form of melody. Yeah. But to be thinking about it is to resist it in the way that it is, as flowing from the unconscious or the superconscious. We can say that it's happening because there's no thought behind it. In that form, it's just happening. It's like just breathing. It's not thinking about breathing. It is breathing. It's like the wind blowing. It's like water flowing, and so on. We have forces at work there that are allowing it to happen in the way that it shows up. Like a waterfall. Gravity rules. It's not like somebody's doing it. It's just kind of the result of forces that are at play there relative to the situation of water flowing downward, let us say. And this is comparable to that. There's no thinking. It's like water, right? Energy flowing downwards, coming out and flowing outwards, being given freely. That's good free jazz, if you ask. Comment. As soon as one stops to think about something of this nature, it kills it. It freezes up. Thinking is not always just flowing. It's not always knowing. It's just thinking. Thought production. So we produce thoughts, but then we produce space as well. We want to stay a little bit closer to the space of being, breathing without thought, than the contrary. So no thought is best thought under certain conditions. There's a time for composition. There's a time to remember. There's a time to think about certain forms of music. But that's not all the time. And there's a time to stop thinking. There's a time to not think about music. There's a time to go beyond music and thinking and yourself altogether. So you don't exist. Nothing exists. Just breathing and whatever's flowing. And if we're listening to nature as we are here, there's flow. There's infinite flow. You could call it bug flow, tree flow, whatever you want. Sky flow, wind flow, sun flow, thought flow, feeling flow. It's constant. Yeah. So life is a continuum, free-flowing soundscape, let us say. You hear the hiss. You can't miss the hiss. And so we need to use these concepts or ideas of the liberation of thought, mind, and self to get closer to what we hope to achieve in the spirit of freedom from thinking and the production of free music, so-called free jazz, ultimately. Yeah.
So in this case where you're saying it's better not to think, then would you say it's more like a meditation when you're playing or when others are playing with you?
That's not far from the accuracy of what it is, yeah. That means a suspension of consciousness. So it requires a discipline in any case. So whether you call it meditation or you call it suspension of your thoughts or the release of your thinking, giving it up, the cessation of thinking, if a person could describe their process as such, then that would be what it is. Meditating on the emptiness of thought or the emptiness of the self as a apparatus of generating thought forms. See? And in this case, we're talking about what is beyond thought forms or thought itself. See? Is there a function that we have which is thoughtlessness? And I would say yes. You have to get to that place. It is everyone, but it seems to be more in someone or other than other beings. See? So that some people are more prone to the suspension of their thinking so that they can benefit or enjoy the function of thoughtlessness. In their case, perhaps according to something they may have to do that requires no thought. And they know that, and they adapt to it to make that facilitated as their state of mind, the state of mind of no thought, emptiness, clear light, let us say. And that is traditionally a meditative requirement and a function of the meditation schools. No doubt on that one. Mm-hmm. But some people don't need to, let's say, exercise the no thought as a command function as much as other people. For some people, they're in no thought already. So a person needs to know whether or not they already have access to no thought to begin with, so that when it comes to a certain kind of operation, a musical operation or meditative operation, they know that it's okay already to not be thinking because it is natural to them. They don't have to think. And so the results of not thinking could be to their advantage and the advantage of other beings who need to know that there is such a plane of consciousness that is also no thinking and is completely natural and comfortable to be in that state. We can create that state. We can release the thought process, even now, and just inhale. No one inhaling, just breathing, inhaling. And with that kind of stillness, utilize that relative to whatever music you think you're hearing or want to play into. The music of no thinking, the music of no thought. Just let the sound come through. Everyone is capable of it, but not everyone believes it enough to exercise it. And that's because often they're too busy thinking otherwise. When we are silent beings, but we don't exercise the silence as easily, as readily, or as immediately as we might under certain other conditions. Emergencies. Or meditation practice in general. Which is a demand to be quiet, silent, not necessarily inward, but more inward than outward. Calm, at ease, in peace, with clarity of feeling, clear feelings. Empty feelings. So it's meditative in nature, for sure. But it's good that you noticed that yesterday when I was on the piano, and you asked about the organization of the chords for study purpose, and I mentioned that there was no organization for the chords. It was a spontaneous manifestation of what was being felt or needed in that moment, so it occurred as such. But it's not something I could do after that in the same way. There was no one there after that to do it in the same way. But that's a different exercise. When we're talking about remembering chord sequences, in a form so that they can be either written down or studied or recorded in some way, that's a very separate function. That's not getting into the freedom of the music. That's getting into the composition of the music. For sure. There is the study of the structures of music as part of the academic regimen of studying to learn how to organize chord sequences, create compositions of a harmonic nature. So that's its own system, but it requires thinking. And so we have to then be clear enough as to what is not thinking in one's case. It could be brought about by the concept, am I thinking? Is this my thinking that is wanting these chords or playing this music? Or not? And the reason why I'm putting it in those terms is because there's a stream in everybody that is silence. We need to know that to tap into it, so that we don't have to busy ourselves with our intellectual karma as being essential to whatever we think we need to play, or want to play, or feel we should play. See? We have to get to the quiet side of the mind. See, I don't know if people would call it the unconscious side, the sleep side. I would call it the is side. Yeah. It already is quietness. Get to that which already and maybe always is the quiet side of your nature. Maybe it's called the pure being side. Maybe it's called the listening side. Listen to nature side. Listen to peace side. Because it is everybody. So then the mind has to be trained to a certain degree. I don't want to be so harsh in my language about it, training your mind, forcing your mind. No, it's already there. It's about tuning into it. Stopping. Looking and listening to the peace already existing, always present. And which is part of the continuum which is always available to each and every one when they listen properly, when they know it's there already. And it's up to them to access it. It's always here. It's always wanting to be used for the benefit of the individual, to access quieter states of consciousness, deeper states. And the truth that silence is always present. See, knowing that we are that already should establish the right tone. We don't have to try to be that, because we are that. We are that in our quietest sort of gestures and movement. It's like ballet. The grace of ballet. Quietness. silent. Absence of noise and sound and so on. Effort. We are that. So we have to switch on silent mind. Fullness. Know that we are that and work from that. And then determine in the process of exercising our right to silentness, see if we enter the clarity of spontaneous musical hearing. But it's already you. It's just a matter of tuning into what that is in your case. That could mean touching the keys at random and recognizing that anything you touch when you're not thinking is compositional. And equally silence when you're in this frame of mind that sound is silence. All sounds manifest from and as silence, silence of sound, the sound of silence. So it could be said that silence could be the prior condition of what needs to be assumed relative to accessing free thought or free music. So that what arises is from silence, the gentleness of silent being, the calmness of clear or pure thought itself. We are the creative, but we need to be the outlet for the creative. We need to be the channel for the creative within us. Yeah. And that's where silence comes in as the appropriate conduit or state of mind to access the deepest levels of quietness we're capable of, out of which comes the real by itself, because there's nobody there. There's no self there. So it's free, like breathing, exhaling calmly. It's there. It's already here. It's never not there. It's always here. Come in. It's always you. It's always with you. It's always in you. We have to feel the presence of what it is as the origin of the creative. So when all else fails to bring you to this center of what it needs to be, then we need to assert our right to stillness. What is stillness? Who is stillness? As a first step. To freedom from neuroses, free creativity, without thought, without self, without question, without suffering, without effort. Om. Hari Om. Hari Om. Shu. Hari Om. Mane. Padma. Om. I feel like I've receded into the shade.
I was wondering how this notion of understanding or becoming more aware of one's silence relates to one's genius.
Well, genius is silent, and it is all-powerful noise as well. It's outrageous. It's crazy. See? It's everything. So a moment of silence could reflect a moment of genius. That means it could be a moment which awakens oneself, and thus be a moment of genius, awakeness. And then the flip side of that. Genius could be the explosion of the earth. The end of it, so to speak. Disappears. Like genius is the sun, genius is the moon, genius is all the planets. Their motion. Genius is the order of the universe. Genius is the sound, as it is the silence beyond the sound. So it's the silence of space, and it's the sound of the voice. Yeah. It is the great height of the universe, the great depth of the ocean. It's genius, extreme angle, or simplicity, utter simplicity itself. To continue, then genius is the knowing the not knowing. And it could also be not knowing the knowing. That indeed could be genius. And then it's determined by whether or not a person is destined to be alive or not. Yeah. So a person can be alive as its own genius and or die into its own genius. And silence may be that which pervades both life and non-life. Mm-hmm. Living and dying. Mm-hmm. Into and out of silence. And there is the genius of self and selflessness. Shoot.